I don't censure you. I don't script you. I know better.
I will hand this to you, and I believe you're going to hold on to it for the introduction.
Then you just clip it on. Yeah, clip it on.
All right.
Is that spot?
Yeah, can you turn that spot off?
Yeah.
Especially on a bald head, it just makes it. That's why I wear hats. Okay,
Hard on us too, because there was this.
yeah, I know. As if I weren't intense enough, Jim. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for coming out. One of the things that we want to do in this course on calling in work is to present some different models of integration, of how faith relates to life and the other callings we have in life. And we've been concerned over the last couple of years to bring in folks, particularly people who are not in what we would call classical church ministry. We have a sense of what that is, but what do other callings look like from a Christian perspective? And Caroline Gilje is with us today. She's our family vet. I would say that. Jackie and I have known her for 20 years. And we got a sense of each other fairly early on. We come from the same point of view. We're believers in Jesus Christ. And Jackie, my wife, and I over the years have had more than one opportunity to see how she lives out her faith through her vocation. Now, when you think of a veterinarian, you think of someone who takes care of animals. Well, that's true, but there's also a lot of people care that's involved there. And oftentimes you see people at pretty bad moments of their life, of their experience. My wife is a pretty tough woman. Haven't seen her cry a lot in 43 years, whatever it is. But Caroline's seen her cry more than once. But so there's a lot of very personal relationships. But when you're the owner of the clinic, and Caroline's the owner of Barrett Station Animal Clinic, you have a lot of other relationships as well. You have property, you have facilities, you have staff, you have vendors, you have taxes. Oh my! You get the whole gamut. So she's going to talk about. I think she's brought her hat with her. She actually needs a whole bunch of hats, and she needs to stack them one on top of the other. We had her with us last year. We found her just utterly charming. We terribly appreciated her, so I wanted to have her back this year. Unfortunately, there was a schedule conflict, so we're putting her on videotape, and thank you for coming out. And this helps us out doubly because we have her not just for our course here, but we will also have her for our Nashville course as well.
Wonderful.
So we're getting a double here, okay? So I'm going to get out of her way. This is Caroline Gilje, our vet, and a very good friend of me and my family. Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you very much. Are you clapping because he left the microphone? That's what I thought. I'm pleased that there's an audience, and had all my ribs in on Mike to get him through this whole lecture. So, and it's not really a lecture. And if it becomes a lecture, you guys got to stop me. First of all, thank you. This is an honor. Mike told me that after last year, I had to come back until I get it right. This class, I want to thank as well. I mean, to have open minds and looking at what vocations and careers and other than what you're in, that takes guts, and it also is admirable for what you are embarking on. Now, unfortunately for you guys, you have to look at my mug for an hour in the screen while my husband and I are in Africa with a group of veterinary friends and their spouses. I can sense your pity for me, but that's where we'll be when this class meets. Seriously, I am excited. And I'm excited because I'm passionate about what I do, but I'm passionate about the subject of career and calling and vocation. The covenant paths and mine have crossed several times. I grew up on 2123 North Ballas Road, which is right next to Covenant Presbyterian Church. In 1964, I attended Vacation Bible School every year until 1970. I was best friends. We were almost inseparable as little kids with Will Tipton. And when I was in college, one of your retired professors, Professor Mayer, his daughter, Judy, was on my dorm floor. We became very close friends. So here's a little background on me, the speaker. To answer St. Louis's favorite question, what high school did you go to? I went to Parkway West High School in 1977, so this is my stomping ground. I spent 3 years at the University of Missouri at Columbia studying chemistry, but then I actually decided, they always say if you weren't going to get into vet school, what would you want to do? And we had to have a second choice, and I chose education. So imagine me, I'm up here teaching, or trying to. So then I spent 4 years at the University of Missouri Veterinary School. And it was a wonderful time and a hard time, not unlike what you all are going through as well. I started my Barrett Station Veterinary Clinic, my hospital, in 1990. So I had been out for 6 years before I embarked on that. Started with a lot of prayer and counseling with an Episcopal minister that's my mentor. I started as a one-man show, and that's because I couldn't afford anything else. And my dream, I thought, was to be 2 to 3 veterinarians strong. Great. Well, now we have 6 veterinarians, and we have 13, more than that. We have 23 staff members. I have a wonderful family. I didn't get married until I was 40, and I have a husband of 16 years, 2 great stepdaughters. One of them is getting a PhD, and 2 horses. It used to be 3 dogs. Just 2 months ago it was 3 dogs, and we've lost 2 within the last 2 months, so we are down to 1 dog. What does every novice lecturer do when asked to speak to a group of postdoctorals besides panic? Well, you yell and scream for help from Mike Williams, and he was no help at all. So I went to the library, and I looked to see what Mr. Webster said about vocation, calling, and career. So for vocation, vocation is a summons or a strong inclination to a particular state or course of action, a divine call in religious life. Calling is a stronger inner impulse toward a particular course of action, especially when accompanied by conviction of divine influence. It's funny how that all... And career originated from the word carraria, and that means road for vehicles. The first definition of career is full speed. That defines my career. The second definition is encounter. And the third is a field for pursuit of consecutive progressive achievements, especially in public, professional, or business life. Well, my reflection on these 3 expressions as it relates to my work has been very rewarding. It's been a good exercise. So thank you, Professor Williams, for making me do this. He didn't make me. But I did want to address the career, the calling, and the vocation part of what I do as a veterinarian and all the other hats that I wear. I made the decision in 5th grade to become a veterinarian. Prior to that, I wanted to be a horse trainer. But at age 11, I said, yep, this is what I want to do. I've always felt lucky about that. I mean, you know and I know, and probably some of you in the room have some, may not have known that you wanted to do this when you were 11. And it's been, I never looked back. There was a bump in the road when I was challenged by a second grade counselor after I had a low score on an aptitude test. She questioned that I didn't have the aptitude to pursue this career and I better just start looking for another career now. Well, my mother, who actually did join us last year for this presentation, she's 5 foot tall. She had white hair, early white, and she didn't ever cross teachers because she wanted them to do their job. Fair enough. I came home crying, told her the story, and she didn't say a word. But she said she was out going up for an errand. Evidently, she jumped in the station wagon, drove up there, and read the riot act to this counselor, who said, "Oh, Mrs. Truss," looking down on her, 9 out of 10 kids want to be veterinarians. We discourage every one of them. And she didn't score very well on the aptitude test, but even if she had, we probably would have discouraged her because the ones that really want to be vets, they'll find a way. Well, my mother didn't particularly like that because she taught us to listen to our teachers. But who said that God doesn't have a sense of humor? Because in 1990, the Christmas of 1990, I had not taken a single vacation because I'd started my practice. And I got in an airplane on Christmas Eve to visit my sister. And it was late. I hadn't worked that day. I had made Christmas Eve a very sacred holiday from the beginning, but I did want to be on call. So it was in the evening. I looked over, and there was the counselor sitting right next to me. The counselor that said I would never be a vet. Of course, she didn't remember that story at all, but I did give her my business card. The level of determination that God gave me to get into vet school, then get out of vet school, and become a veterinarian enabled me to battle a chronic headache that I've had since I was 15. And when I think back, sometimes I wonder, how did I get through these courses with that kind of pain? But I know that was a gift, and I know it was a gift from God. In fact, it was with that coping mechanism that I learned how to get through it, and that's served me well to this day. A calling is frequently reinforced with signs. Oh, it was meant to be. Well, I think it is. I think there's signs everywhere you look when you have a calling and when you act on that calling. And one of the physical signs is a stack of appreciation cards that I keep in my office and I thumb through on bad days. But I have a phone message I got last week, and I was having one of those bad headaches, and she knew it, but I still gave her some time, and she left the most nicest voicemail on my phone. So our phone system, I've just got it saved, and I've already listened to it twice in a week. And I'm glad I didn't have to do this last week. I feel wonderful every day because of who I am and what I do. And that has got to be part of the divine intervention. I seek and get guidance from God in decisions and actions throughout my day, no matter what I'm doing. And I have had a calling, and we'll talk about it again, but I always wondered if God said, well, if she listened once, she'll listen again. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. So there has been divine influence throughout my career on every aspect of my veterinary and rest of my life. Grace, I love that word. Grace has allowed me to realize that God has intervened. In a retrospective analysis of my vocation and all the details of my success, I'm convinced that God's grace has driven my decisions. It's because of grace that I get to be here with you today. The role faith has played in my career is pretty neat. On paper, as a child, I always loved church, more importantly, I love God. I'd go and watch my dad lay read and became a lay reader myself. Most every Sunday. I taught Sunday school while I was in college. And I enjoy listening to sermons, especially my mentor, Ed, when he was in charge of chaplain. He was the chaplain of St. Luke's Hospital, and he would say a sermon every day, or every Sunday, but sometimes I was the only one in the parish or in the chapel, and I got a personalized sermon from someone that knew exactly what I needed to hear. I studied the Bible and still do. I go to a Bible study every week at 6:30 in the morning on Fridays. And so that's my faith on paper, but it's more than what's on paper that makes someone faithful. I pray not only to myself or with myself, with God, but I ask clients if I can pray with them at the time of their loved one's death, their loved pet's death, before a major surgery. If I detect a lot of anxiety, I'll ask if they'd like to say a prayer. And of course, 95% of the time the answer is, oh, yes. And then they feel better when they're waiting for the news of their pet's surgery. And as a veterinarian, and I think, Mike, you talked about it a minute ago, it's not just about animals that you have to know about and talk to. You have to talk to the client. That's how you can help the animal. And communication is so important, but you are a part of their lives. You hear good things that happen in their lives. You hear not so good things happen. And I will frequently say, may I put you on my prayer list? Or I will pray for, thank goodness that this turned out the way you wanted. The other time that I also, when I send a sympathy card after a euthanasia, I will always write, you are in my prayers. And very frequently, I'll get comments that made the difference to that sympathy card. With my staff, whether I take them out individually, they'll see me bow my head in prayer. I don't ask them to pray with me but one of them has started to do that, which is kind of nice. But anytime we're all together at my house, which is every Christmas and many showers, I hire the 20-somethings, so we have baby showers, we have wedding showers. I should say that in the other direction. All kinds of things. If they're at my home, we all hold hands and we say a prayer right before we eat. And the other time with staff is that every now and then, if we learn that one of our team is in trouble, a car accident, or stranded in an airport, and there's some danger, I'll ask if anybody wants to come back in the back and hold hands, and we'll say a prayer. And it's usually well received. And what I have found in this 26 years of doing this with my staff is that they'll actually come to me and ask for individual prayers in their own lives. We have every month in our staff meeting, there's in our hearts corner, and that's when people can put what's on their mind and in their hearts. We don't pray at the staff meeting. You have to be kind of careful, from what I understand, about pushing it, but it allows them to know what to pray for. Faith must be maintained, honored, and implemented in every aspect of our lives. It can't just be one-sided or one spot. As a small business owner, and I do wear some hats, and we'll talk about that. But as a small business owner, my word must be as good as gold. To my customers, to my bank, to my business dealings. And who said God doesn't smile? In 1990, I opened my practice. In 1992, the landlord said, we've decided we're going to sell the land that your building's on. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is not good. all of my savings was tied up in starting that practice. However, I had had an attorney write up the contract, and there was a provision. I had a 5-year lease with 2 5-year renewals, so I was protected. And so I had something, but I didn't know how much I would get from that. But they were going to kick me out no matter what. I mean, I couldn't stay there, so I had to find a place. And I'm wandering all over. And I wandered up Manchester, and at that point it wasn't separated. And I almost picked a house there to rent. And God, I'm just sure as I'm standing here, there was dealings with that man. He said the rent was this. I got zoning into pair. And once I got zoning into pair, he said, well, the price is this. And I said, that's not what you said. And he said, well, before that, the pair wasn't zoned for veterinarian. So I backed away from that deal because I know my word is good, but if I can't trust someone else, I kind of knew. Well, the writing on the wall was that 6 months later, they divided that road. And that would have killed my business. It would have been terrible. So the other thing is the place that I found was fabulous. And it was a drug and alcohol rehab center that they had trashed the building and trashed the driveways, and no one on the street liked the landlord because of what he had brought in. And I was walking down the street one day and I said, do you know who owns this building? And he said, yeah, I know. And I said, do you know if they would like to rent it? Because I didn't think I'd have enough money to buy. And he said, I'm never renting this building again. He said, it's for sale. So he and I met. We went to the St. Louis County and tried to zone it so that he could sell me just that building, because by then I found out I got enough to buy it. And they said, no, it's not going to be zoned. We can't break it up. You got to have this other parcel, which I knew I didn't have the money for. And about a day later, he calls me and he said, I did some homework on you. He said, my wife and I would like to finance your purchase of the entire complex, and we'll rent from you until we retire. And that allowed me some amazing opportunities to then build the place that I am now. And those things just, I don't think they fall from the sky. I think they're from God, but you have to be looking for them. The other place that faith and needs to be present and is the employer must be consistent with my words and my actions, with only honorable goals, because in my mind I have to be respected by every one of my staff, or it's not going to work well. And I do discuss and pray regularly with my accountant and my financial consultant. When an employee disagrees with me, their argument usually starts with, I know your intentions are good. Well, that's the best thing they could start with, because we aren't going to agree on everything. But if they know my intentions are good, then they're at least going to listen to why I wanted to do it a certain way. When a coworker never doubts where your heart and your faith is, leading is much easier. As a veterinarian, I've learned that God guides my hands. On December 28th, 1996, I had a dog named Bodo. He looked like a Muppet. He was 75 pounds. He had brown hair coming out of every spot on his head and his body. And he and I were, and he was only 17 months old. Less than that. He was 13 months old. And all of a sudden, he collapsed when we were out walking. And I knew enough that I knew we were in big trouble. He was going into shock. The gentleman I was hiking with was the brother of a veterinarian. So he followed directions very well, and we got, and there was no veterinary clinic close. It was faster to go to mine. So we went to mine, and at that point I knew that I was losing him. He was bleeding, but he didn't have any blood on him. And he kept getting this swelling in his neck. And I finally thought, it's got to be there, and we got to get going. And He was so close to death that we didn't even have anesthesia on board when we actually started the surgery. And he couldn't feel it because he was already passed out. Well, in the middle of all that, I didn't know what I was doing because I'd never seen this before. I was muddling in a lot of blood and finally found an artery. But it was an artery I had not cut. So I clamped it off. My friend was doing all he could do with me directing, and it was definitely an experience I'll never forget. That dog did survive over 3 or 4 days of touchy stuff, and he was laying in the cage one time while a very smart radiologist walked by, and she said, "I know what that was." I had been pounding my head for 3 days and didn't know what it was. She said, "That was a spontaneous rupture of the thymic artery." "Oh, really?" She said, "There's 7 reported cases and 6 of them are dead. And the only reason that the 7th one didn't die was because it was the littermate that had the same thing 4 days earlier." And I said, "How do you know this?" And she said, "Well, I'm studying for my boards and we look at all the obscure stuff." So I did the right thing without knowing what I was doing. I was just trusting that I would figure it out, and I did. In daily difficult surgeries, God directs my hands. He gives me words and he gives me thoughts when I'm praying. Let's see, did I do something wrong? No. Oh yeah. I knew there was this part. I just didn't see where I'd written it. So I wear the hat of a businessman. I wear the hat of an employer. I wear the hat of a veterinarian. And then I just wear the hat of plain old me. Because if you don't have even if you know you're in the right vocation, even if you are satisfied that this is exactly what you should do, if you don't have that sense of conviction of just plain old you, it's just a career. There was, in the summer of 1998, I received a calling from God. And it was a very moving thing. I was working on a dog. I heard a voice through the walls. We had thin walls back then. They aren't as thin anymore, darn it. And I heard this client, and when I heard her voice, I knew exactly who it was, and I knew she'd been sick. And every time I saw her, she'd get a little sicker, and I had never asked her what it was. Ironically, also, I had been in brownies with her, and that's why she chose me as a veterinarian. But we didn't know each other very well. And I said, some words came out of my mouth that were not mine, and that the words were, "Jody, what is it going to take to make you better?" Now, some people use that phrase a lot. I've never used that phrase. In my whole life, I'd never used that phrase. Why it came out that day through the walls while I'm working, I'm sewing up a dog, I'll never know, but I guess in hindsight I do know, because she, in her humorous, crazy way, said, "Only a kidney." And I knew on that moment that it was going to work. And so I said, "Can you wait for just a second?" So she waited, and I cleaned up, and I walked out, and I said, "Who's your nephrologist?" "Why do you want to know?" "I just want to know. I just want to know." So she wrote me his name, and she'd been on the waiting list for a kidney for well over 4 years, and she was on dialysis 18 hours a day with peritoneal dialysis. And the surgeon that was her and the nephrologist worked together because she was on a transplant list. I made an appointment with the transplant doctor. And he said, I called him and I said, I'd like to donate a kidney to one of your patients. And he said, really? He said, which one? And I said, Jody Daniels. Oh, Jody. And he said, well, are you a sister? No. Are you a really close friend? No. He said, I think I need to talk to you. Well, it ends up that most kidney doctors won't even talk to somebody off the street because there's such a black market on it. But if you have a patient that is just not going to match anybody because of lupus, which is what she had, he said, let's just, I need a BUN and a creatinine, and if you give that to me, then I'll meet with you. Well, he had it the next day because that's faster than you can get a BUN and creatinine at the hospital, because we had a hospital that did our emergency blood. And he looked at the levels and he looked at me and he said, why do you want to do this? And I said, I don't know. I've been called by God. I can tell you that this is not my idea because I didn't even know how she was sick. And later he said, if I hadn't said those words, I probably would not have been even looked at further. So they did the match first, which he said he would do first because there wasn't a chance in heck that I would match. And lo and behold, one of the best matches ever. So then we went backwards at that point and did all the other tests, and in December of that year, I gave her a kidney. He said that he didn't think she would live to be in the year 2000, to see 2000. And she did live. She lived 15 more years. She died 2 years ago. I talk to God almost constantly, and that's plain old me. That's not trying to be a veterinarian, or it's just who I am. And I'm blessed with a husband that shares my faith. The last little topic, do pets go to heaven? God is a loving God. Some would say God is love. I have seen the love that pets give people and people give pets, and if that's not from God, I don't think anything is. It is clear in the Bible that God created all creatures. So if He created all creatures, He's going to take them back. I've observed and experienced love of a pet that passes all understanding. And I get to see that unconditional love 10 to 15 times a day with my patients and their owners. I wrote a letter on the night I had to put one of my dogs to sleep. This is how it ended. This is tough because our last one I had to put to sleep in Memorial Day.